everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie and today we're talking dialogue. Specifically, how to write good, strong dialogue. Personally, dialogue is one of my favorite parts of the story to write, but it can definitely be really hard to make it sound realistic, to make sure that there's not too much of it all chunked together, to make sure it doesn't sound like your characters are like AI robots talking. So today I'm going to share my top dialogue tips. My first tip is to make sure that while dialogue is going on, while a conversation is going on, stuff is still happening in the background and all around. Don't forget to describe your character's actions and any background noise, any internal monologue. Just don't forget about the other elements of the story amidst the dialogue. Just big unbroken chunks of dialogue can be really hard to read, and just including background noise and action helps create a more immersive conversation. Like if your characters are, I don't know what my first thought was, if your characters are at a bar. I don't know why I thought of that, but if your characters are at a bar, write a line of dialogue that one of the characters says, and then maybe the other character pauses that conversation to order a drink. And then while they're answering, the bartender is making up their drink and the ice is clinking inside the glass, and then the other character responds again while the other character gets their drink slid down the counter to them, leaving a trail of condensation. Just make sure to not forget description and just that detail of their surroundings to keep your reader immersed and interested, and also to break up the big chunks of dialogue. My next tip is pretty similar to the first one, and that is to not have big chunks of dialogue. Break it up via some action, some description of their surroundings. But if you're having like a really long conversation, it can get kind of repetitive, just being like, my dog is on my bed behind the camera and she's snoring, so I'm really sorry if you could hear that. Anyways, it can get really repetitive, just kind of being like dialogue tags and then the line of dialogue, he said, and then there's a paragraph, more dialogue tags, she said. It can get very repetitive, just like over and over down the page. So make sure that you're splitting it up with the description of the background, and also you can use dialogue tags. For some reason, in like writing classes and other writing advice that I've seen online, they tell you to not use like tags. I don't know why. Like they say like just use said or just use other words to describe talking. Don't ever like have a quote and then be like, he reached across the table, or like dialogue, she rolled her eyes. Like you can 100% do that. Don't do it too much, like don't do the action tags too much. That can feel amateur-y and can feel fanficky, but you can do it sometimes. I don't know why they tell you to never do it. I like it when I read it, so I don't know. Maybe it's just personal preference. If you don't like writing like that, then you don't have to, but yeah, break it up. Use different structure for each dialogue. Like maybe one line, the sentence that your character says is broken up by the dialogue tag, and in the next paragraph it starts with the dialogue tag and then a comma and then the dialogue. Just make sure to mix it up and break it up, and then insert some description of what the characters are doing and what's going on in the background to create an immersive, complete, fully fleshed out, detailed scene. My next tip is to not use words like and like. I know that human beings talk like that, and I'm all for realistic dialogue. I love breaking up my sentences in places that maybe aren't grammatically correct, but they're kind of how a person would talk, you know, like finishing a thought and then adding something else. instead of just writing a whole sentence that's like, and this, and this, and this. Most people don't talk like that. So don't get me wrong, I'm all for realistic dialogue, but don't use filler words like, and like too much, because it's just clunky and it distracts the reader from what your character is actually saying, like what the sentence actually is. It can just hurt the impact of your dialogue if you're kind of breaking it up with like stuttering and like. Of course, just like the dialogue tags that everyone tells you not to use for some reason, you can use and like on occasion. I do. Just know when to use them and know when to maybe not. Like during a like maybe angry rain confession scene, don't have your character saying I love you, like really love you, like don't have them do that, or don't have them say but maybe during like a casual conversation, just in passing, they could say once. But just remember that realistic dialogue is really good and making your characters talk like real people is really good, but some things are better left out of the story, such as and like it's just too clunky and it makes the sentence too long and it kind of distracts the reader of what is even happening, like what are they even saying. My next piece of advice is to use subtext. Most people when talking don't say exactly what they mean to say. They'll either maybe go quiet, or maybe they'll be sarcastic and be like, well, she's pretty. Like if a character sees their ex with a new girl and that makes them upset, mad, sad, they're not gonna just be like, I'm so mad. They'll either maybe go quiet, or maybe they'll be sarcastic and be like, well, she's pretty. Or like maybe a character hates their sibling or something. If somebody asks about their sibling, they're not gonna say, I hate them, they're an asshole. Or maybe they would, but just consider maybe them using some sarcasm or lying, or being like, oh yeah, they're great. Like if your characters are just talking, like having a conversation, and they're always just saying exactly what they mean, it can sound really robotic and just not human-like and not realistic. Just make sure to use subtext, and also remember that your readers are not stupid. Like when I read a book, I know when a character is being sarcastic or when they're lying because I remember a detail told earlier. You don't have to over-explain and say exactly what's going on every time. You can leaving out some information and stuff like that. My next piece of advice is to keep in mind your character's personality, and like in a conversation or if they're reacting to something, what would they actually say and what would they actually react like. I feel like when I was younger, I would just write like whatever I would say in that situation, and I would never like consider what my characters would actually say, because I have characters who are really hot-headed, and if you like say something mean to them, they're gonna cuss you out. And then I have other characters that are more soft-spoken, and if you're mean to them, they'll probably just be like, you're right. Make sure that all your characters are reacting how they would based on their personality, and they're not all reacting the same. I feel like you should be able to write a conversation between two or more characters without any dialogue tags, without any information on who is speaking, and from the way that they're talking alone, you should be able to tell the difference between the characters. Obviously not when the characters are like, hi, or like, I'm good, like, you don't have to be that different, but just keep in mind that every one of your characters would have a different way of speaking and a different way of interacting and reacting to the world and to other people's actions and other people's words. So definitely keep that in mind in your dialogue, that your character still has a unique voice, just like they do in the monologue, in the internal dialogue, in the description of the story, in the voice of the story. They do still have a unique way of talking, a unique voice, a unique outlook when they're actually speaking to other characters in the story. My next piece of advice is to not info dump during dialogue. Sorry, I got a little intense. I just see this a lot because I think we as writers are taught to not info dump in the like body paragraphs, like just no info dumping, and we're told to sprinkle in information into like dialogue or whatever, but I feel like I see a lot of info dumping in dialogue. Of course, kind of like all of these tips, take with a grain of salt. You can share information through dialogue. That is my favorite way to share information, is through dialogue, because usually if something crazy is going on in the plot that like you don't want to info dump, your characters will inevitably talk about it. But I feel like you can do it in a way that is I was gonna say demure that is a little more subtle and not so info dumpy. Like, let's say it's your character's parents' anniversary, and your character is having a conversation with a friend, and instead of saying, my parents hate each other, this anniversary is stupid, maybe they could say, I don't even know why we're having this anniversary anyway, it's not like they love each other. Instead of just coming out straight with information or dumping the information through the character's voice, there is definitely a way to drop information in a more realistic way, in a way that your character would. Again, back to your character's voice or whatever. Like, maybe your character would not say that their parents hate each other. Maybe they'd just be quiet because they're a little more reserved and keep their thoughts to themselves. But yeah, there's definitely a way to drop information in the dialogue without being super info dumpy and super blunt and robotic. Another kind of example of this no info dumping thing I wrote down was, instead of saying, Dave is my best friend of 2 years, maybe your character can say, can't believe I've been stuck with this idiot for 2 years, and then like nod towards Dave. No real human being just kind of like straight up says information like that. We all kind of put our own spin on it, unless somebody like asks like, oh, what you been up to, then you just kind of start dumping information. But just in a conversation, nobody is just like explaining their entire life and their entire situation. So make sure to be careful with info dumping, and if you're gonna sprinkle information in, keep it realistic. Like, what would a person actually say? My next tip is to use shortened words and like abbreviations. Is that the right word? I don't know if that's like the right way to describe this point, so I'm just gonna go into some examples. Instead of your character saying, I don't know, have them say, I don't know, because that's how real people talk. Nobody really goes around and is like, I cannot believe this. You know, maybe your character says, I can't believe this shit. Like, make sure that you're being realistic. Unless your character does speak like that, I cannot believe it, then go off. But really, my number one rule when writing dialogue is just like, would I say this? Would a friend say this? And would I think it's weird? If a friend said this to me, like, would I think they got replaced by an alien? That's how I figure out if the dialogue's realistic or not. My next tip is to take your character's emotion into account. Like, if your character is angry, their sentences, their dialogue might be choppier and more broken up sentences, because that's how people talk when they're angry. If your character's sad, kind of same thing, more broken up, choppy, shorter sentences. If your character is nervous, maybe they stumble over their words, stutter or hesitate. Stuttering, you have to be a little careful, because I personally find when books like when dialogue is like T-T-T, that dog is scaring me, like to kind of say that your character's stuttering, that kind of cringes me out a little bit. But for me, when I write stuttering, I'll either do one letter dash then the word to show that they're kind of stumbling, so that it's not like going on for too long. Or I'll have them like repeat a word, like be like, that, comma, he swallowed hard, that dog is scaring me, to show that they're stumbling. So you have to be careful with stuttering, but it can still be useful to show that your character is nervous. But yeah, just take your character's like emotions into consideration. Like if they're angry, they're probably not gonna go on like a 4-paragraph long spiel about like why they're mad. They're probably gonna give like one-worded answers, some grunts maybe. Again, depends on your character and their personality, but take their emotions into consideration with how they might be talking. My final piece of advice is my favorite, and that is to read your dialogue out loud. You're gonna look insane sitting in your room talking to yourself, but girl, we all look crazy. We're writers, all right? So reading aloud just really helps make sure that your sentences flow and that the dialogue sounds realistic and sounds like something that a human being would say, because you're saying it, so you're like testing it out. Also, sometimes when I'm reading my dialogue out loud, I realize that I need to break up a sentence or insert some sort of dialogue tag because I need to convey some sort of emotion that came up when I was reading it. I just think that reading it aloud really helps work through any last kinks and bumps and make sure that it sounds how you want and that it sounds realistic and that it all just flows. So sit there in your room and read one character's lines like this and then read another character's lines like this. Just talk to yourself, it's fun. Anyways, that is all that I have for today's video. I hope that these tips were helpful. If they were, please give this video a like and leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know any of your own personal dialogue tips. We can all just help each other. If there are any videos you'd like to see from me, please let me know. Any other writing tips that you want to see, or just any other ideas in general, I'm always open. You can also subscribe, that really helps me out. I post bookish content, I post about writing, obviously. I post writing tips, writing advice, writing vlogs, and then I also post about reading, such as reading vlogs, book recommendations, all stuff like that. So anything to do with a book, from writing it to reading it, I talk about it on this channel. So if that is up your alley, you should subscribe. I post once a week, sometimes more, and I'm very active on my community tab, always posting writing questions, writing updates, stuff like that. So I love being active and interactive, so please subscribe. But yeah, thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a really great day.